There's two theories about giant sharks. One of them might be true, and one of them decidedly is not. The idea of the megalodon. The megalodon is its own species, and none of the sharks that we see are actually megalodon. The ones on the deep sea cameras might be because the megalodon was huge. So one of the theories is that it's one of the sharks that we have, and that the deeper the shark goes, like the older it gets, the more it eats, the bigger it gets. The ones that don't end up getting their stomachs full of garbage that they can't pass through their intestinal tract, well, it just stays in their stomach, and most of them end up dying or getting caught. They stay pretty close to the surface. But there's one that's able to eat healthy and all that, a shark like that, the bigger it gets, because some sharks and also some rays are able to breathe through their skin, and apparently the more pressure is put on their system, like external pressure, the better it works. So apparently it works extremely well, especially if you have a bigger mass. Although most of the sharks that we have pictures of in the deep sea are very small. We've also got a lot of different types of fish that we've brought up from the deep sea, and they tend to balloon out from not having any pressure. All of the cells in their body basically stretch as far as they can because all of the wetness that comprises the majority of their body is under extreme quantities of pressure. So there's a lot of pressure inside of it as well to equal with the pressure outside. So deep sea animals tend to be very small. But a shark, the possibility is something up there that the bigger it gets, the more deep it goes, the less it requires oxygen from the surface because it's able to get all of its oxygen out of the pressure on its skin somehow. I guess, if that's what scientists are saying, there's a possibility that one of those sharks, to a certain extent, can go deeper and thrive deeper, but wouldn't be able to surface more because it has too much mass and too much pressure on its cells. So basically, its cells have to store more water in order to equalize the pressure inside of the cell to the outside environment. So a shark that has a lot of mass would probably need to have an ultra efficient system like that, where it's able to breathe through its skin, especially when it gets down to the point where there's so little oxygen that its gills aren't going to work the same. Gills are pretty interesting, actually. I believe it all still requires some sort of flow through the gills to make it work, but I don't know. I'm not a scientist who studies exclusively sharks. So I guess the possibility of, let's say, one of the breeds of sharks that they say there's no size limit on, like they can just keep on growing, they just never get that big because they end up eating too much trash or getting hit by a boat propeller or, who knows. They say there might be some real big giants out there, or, they have a certain length that they grow for their environment and for the amount of food that they're able to consume. But if one of them misses out on a gene that says, hey, maybe you should stop here, If you get much bigger than this, you're going to eat everything around you, and then you're not going to have any food. Some animals don't get that gene, and there's a possibility that one of those genetic flukes is swimming around down there all huge as shit. There's a possibility of it. Just going around munching on like half-eaten squid or, a half-dead friggin' orca or something. A shark that can't come that close to the surface, but it's definitely, something that we don't want to mess with. And maybe we do catch stuff like that on camera in the deep sea dives. But there's also the fact of it's not three-dimensional. It's not like they're mounting two cameras side by side together going down there so they can see how close it is and actually measure how big it is. Because if you've got a 50-foot shark 5 feet away, it's huge. But if you've got a 2-foot shark an inch away, it's huge too. So you can't really tell unless it's bumped the camera, and only if it's strong enough to actually move the camera so you can tell that it's been bumped. When it gets bumped, you can measure the stuff on it then, compared to the width of your lens, and you can get a pretty good measurement of it. But that's what it would have to do to be able to do that. Actually physically interact with the environment that the camera is attached to. That way you can measure any of the parts on the camera. Like, let's say there's a cage that's to protect the camera, and say you've got a squid that wraps around it. You can measure the size of the squid based on knowing the size of whatever it is that you're filming. Let's say it's just welded 3/4 rebar. Well, all those pieces of rebar are 3/4 of an inch wide, so you can measure it off that. Now, the other one is the modern megalodon theory. This one is the idea that the megalodon was its own ancient species of shark, which I do believe, and most people believe. But the modern megalodon theory is the belief that megalodon somehow, just a few dozen or maybe even a few hundred of the species have passed along in the deep sea trenches for millions of years. And that there's probably some bodies down there from these sharks that aren't deteriorating very fast that we could probably find underneath the silt and all the stuff that's basically, it's permanently snowing down there. That's how a few of the deep sea divers have described it, like in the Marianas Trench. It just seems like it's always snowing. So, I suppose there is that possibility. I mean, we thought sunfish were extinct, and it turns out they're not. Not only that, they're huge. Like when I was learning about sunfish when I was in school, about how they had found one and they were thought to be like extinct for millions of years extinct. And then a fisherman caught one. And I didn't realize they were measured in meters. Like, they're more than a few feet long. They're fucking huge. And they're also gentle giants. People have been known to swim with them, and the things just don't care that they're there. So there is the possibility of that going on as well. But I really don't think so, because we're not talking about, a fossil record of maybe tens of millions of years at most, and when a megalodon was supposedly around. I say supposedly around because we still have problems getting the dates precise. Although one of the ways they've been able to get it close is by literally hand counting layers of sand in different types of sediment. And basically, they measure the rings of sand the same way that you would measure the rings of a tree. And it'll tell you year by year how much sediment was deposited, what changed in the environment, or some of the things that may have changed in the environment. But you also don't necessarily know how many years were in each layer, or if each layer is just a different season. Anyway, both of those theories, the theory of a shark that basically just got gigantism and it went deeper down for dinner because the bigger stuff is down lower, there's a possibility of that. I think there's a lot more possibility of that than there is of it basically being a modern sunfish. I don't think it's that sunfish came back from extinction necessarily. I think it's that we just didn't encounter the areas where they are. Now, there was one photographer who was able to get a photograph of, I guess what he was claiming was hundreds of sunfish. Basically like those pictures that you see where there's hundreds of manta rays or hundreds of stingrays all on a migration. Well, apparently he saw that with hundreds of sunfish, which is pretty cool. But the thought of a mega species from back then, that ancient, that old, still being around, especially given where we found them, there's more of a chance that the megalodon operated closer to the surface than deep sea. That's based on the megalodon evidence itself. Like it really wasn't built for deep sea diving. It wasn't something that was necessarily going to function in the deep. Now that's also based on basically scientific studies by, again, people who know far better than I do, and I'm just having to take their word for it. Do I believe that the ancient species of megalodon is still around? Absolutely not. Do I believe there's the possibility that there was maybe a great white that was born with albinism and is completely white with pink eyes? Yes, I believe that's a possibility. Do I believe that there's a possibility that there might be a genetic fluke that would make one black or purple or something like that? Yes, there's always the possibility. You never know. Is there the possibility of it getting a genetic fluke giving it gigantism? Yes, there is. There have been some accounts, not saying that they were necessarily exaggerated, but if we go back through history, a lot of the sharks that people were claiming to have caught. Now, some of the bigger ones in these stories, they're saying, oh, they were probably just whale sharks. That's why they were so easy to catch. They're pretty docile. For the most part, they swim slowly. If you were a whaler, you might have confused one for a whale from the top if it was in the middle of basically a hump dive. But other than that, like, yeah, no, it's definitely looks like a shark. But, you know, when you look back through history, you go back to the 1800s, there's a lot of accounts of sharks that are, 50, 60 feet long. That's pretty significant. That is huge. And they were described as being, a lot more slender. So what species of shark would that be? And if they got gigantism so that they're that big, there's a possibility that we might encounter one or two of those, in recent history or in the recent future. There's a possibility that genetic anomaly could be in one of those sharks. And that'd be pretty cool, right? Kind of like when that guy got that bear that was, I think they said 6 inches taller and like 200 pounds heavier than any bear that anybody had ever shot before. Like, that's pretty significant, and that happened in modern times. There's also bear skulls from like the 17 and 1800s that they have in museums that are actual skulls of some really, really, really big bears, like that put polar bears to shame. And polar bears are really tall when they stand on their back legs. I believe that there's more of a possibility that if there are giant sharks, and there might be, I'm fairly certain it would be from a gigantism gene, and I wouldn't imagine that they would get to the size that they are in a lot of ancient Greek writings and some of the ancient Roman writings. And some of the Roman writings, they were claiming they were, well, equivalent in our measurement, about 200 feet. That's pretty big. The Greeks, they said that some of the sharks were big enough to swallow whole ships. Now, I don't know about all that. Maybe a whole boat, or at least look like it's big enough to. When I saw the megalodon picture with the actual megalodon mouth that they had at the museum compared to the biggest mouth of a great white, and it was a casting of the biggest great white jaw ever discovered, and it was cast, and it's in a museum in like Australia or something. Well, this other museum that had the megalodon mouth also had the biggest great white shark mouth casting inside of it, so that you could see that this thing was like, it was big enough to swallow a dinghy. if you had if you had a 16-foot sailboat, I would be afraid of that thing at least being able to bite it in half. I mean, it's pretty big. Of course, that depends on how the sailboat's made. Like, if it was a 16-foot craft, but you had a deep keel board, it wouldn't be able to do much. And what's the other one called? The one in the middle. Anyway, some boats have those crafted into them already, and they can extend 5 or 6 feet into the water, or more. If you've got one of those, then a dagger board, that's what it's called. On some of the smaller craft, they have a dagger board that goes into the water almost half of its length. So it would be like 8 feet underwater at the end of the dagger board. And some of them have it so that it's set in place. If a shark tried to bite you, it would only be able to get you to the dagger board if it was one of those megalodons. And there's also a possibility that megalodons themselves were just one of those genetic flukes. But also, it was believed that maybe the megalodon, even though, during the period that we find the fossils in, that part of the crust of the earth would have been a lot closer to the surface. We don't necessarily know. So the modern megalodon theory, I think, is out the window. It's a possibility, but is such a slight and minute possibility. It's nearly not there. But we have seen like the Tasmanian devil. When I was in school growing up, we were told that the Tasmanian devil is extinct. We were also taught that the what was it, the Tasmanian cat or the Tasmanian wolf was extinct, and one of those they just recently found some. So I mean that's pretty cool. Stuff that was known to be extinct and it's not. Of course, we also have cloning technology and a lot of genetic material because like the Tasmanian wolf, it it died out and like I think they said they killed the last one in like the 1920s or 1930s, and don't quote me on that, I'm probably wrong. But that might be enough, depending on what they did with the carcass, to be able to get some genetic material out of it and possibly find a surrogate mother. I don't know what science has in store for all of us. But I do believe that it will store for all of us knowledge. I might sneeze a few more times. Maybe we will find a giant shark. Maybe we will get to test its genetic makeup to see what kind of a shark it really is. Maybe we'll have scanners that won't hurt it and we can leave it alive. And we'll be able to compare it to the megalodon mouth that we have and see if it's the same internally. Maybe we'll get an answer to those questions. God, I am so snotted up. I know I have some Kleenex in here though. Oh, toilet paper, that'll work. Anyway, I think some of these theories are pretty cool. And I think the possibilities are definitely there. We do have evidence of people being at least 8'6". And I think that might be the tallest man on record in the Guinness Book of World Records, but I don't know for certain. So, gigantism in humans. When you see the vast differences in our heights, but that most of us are not 8'6", and that it is very rare to have someone that tall, and I believe that might have been the 1700s when that guy was alive. So does the deep sea shark theory hold water? Apparently it does. And from what the professors and stuff that I was listening to were talking about, especially with sharks being able to breathe through their skin, that's really cool. That's cool to know. And when they say that it works better if it's under pressure, that's cool to know too. Also, there's the idea that the deeper that you go, the more muscle mass you need to have. You'd be able to move slower deep sea, but you'd also need more mass in order to move. More muscles. There is a lot of stuff in the ocean that eats cartilage, though. And there's a lot of bacteria and stuff, surprisingly, that thrive in saltwater environments. In order for it to become a fossil, basically it has to be beached and covered in sand before something finds it and scavenges it. Or it's got to be beached close enough to shore that it's going to be brought up off of the Earth's surface or brought out of the ocean onto the Earth's surface within a few 100 million years. And the erosion process can happen quickly to just about any terrain, including terrain that's solid granite. And we've gotten to see examples of volcanoes that had a very thick layer of obsidian, and the obsidian eroded away. It's all very, very interesting, and I don't have all of the answers to it because I'm not somebody who gets insanely into the studies of it, but I like dinosaurs, I like sharks, I also like the way things work, and I like the modern world. I see a lot of the plants that we have in our immediate vicinity and in our surroundings, and we've found ways to harness energy from those things. And, we could definitely live in harmony with nature. A lot of those ideas are really cool. A lot of the ideas that people have come up with about megalodons are really cool, and the reason that I don't get as much into megalodons as a lot of people is that I don't care about megalodons. My chances of meeting a megalodon in my life are, what are there, supposedly like five people who have ever taken a confirmable picture of a giant shark, and even those are in debate. It's all based on the fact that things never interacted with the camera, so we don't really know how big they are. They did it on a basis of the snow that was falling at the time. Basically, it's silt and sediment that's slowly utilizing its gravitic properties and settling to as close to the core of the earth as it can, I guess. I suppose that's how gravity works. That's how it was explained to us as kids. I just think it's really cool that the earth is spinning at 1,100 miles per hour and we're not all getting flung off the thing like, like when you stick water in a bucket and then you swing it around real fast and all the water stays in the bottom of the bucket. I've heard a lot of really interesting theories. The flat earth theory. That one's pretty interesting. I'd say interesting, but I don't believe it's correct by any means. So between the two theories of modern giant sharks. The modern megalodon having come from literally the same genetic makeup as megalodons of 150 million years ago, something like that. I don't think they're anywhere near um, the same genetic makeup. I think they're definitely, the modern shark is an offshoot of those old ancient sharks, sort of. And I believe that one of these modern sharks getting gigantism or having a genetic anomaly that, was in their genetic past and still is somehow carried in their genetic line. I think there's a possibility that there's a few of them. With the death rate of baby sharks, though, and how many of them are eaten, like 90% of baby sharks will be eaten in the first week. That's insane. They'll be eaten by their parents, they'll be eaten by each other, and any predator around. Being a baby shark is a hazardous duty, for certain. That also depends on the shark species and where they're born, I suppose. Like I said, I don't know every breed of shark. Whether the megalodon was something that primarily breathed through its skin, we don't know. There was a giant crocodile, or a crocodilian, that had a pretty big land mammal in its belly. I was looking at some of the excavation pictures of that. Between that one and the one with the protoceratops, they had a little raptor of some sort. It looked like a compy, but it was a little tiny raptor of some sort that looked like it was engaged in a battle with a protoceratops, which is like a triceratops that doesn't have horns. It's just got a bump on the front. Anyway, the protoceratops is just a baby. It's real small. It's about the size of a frog, and you can see the way that it's splayed out. It kind of looks like a frog. You know, frogs have a wide front stance. And from what it looks like, the protoceratops was biting the leg of the raptor type thing, or the arm of the raptor type thing, and it was like against a sand cliff or something, and a big old glob of sand just landed on top of them, and neither one of them could move. They were just stuck there, and that's how they died, and that's how their bones were saved. My favorite, bar none, though, I really like the Microraptor and the Archaeopteryx. Those are my two favorite birds. I like the bones of them just because it shows how a bird's bones really work in real life. If you've ever, all right, for example, when I was volunteering cleaning up a church, they always had an issue with birds dying over on the western side of the building. I don't know what it was that was killing them, but I know they died in some pretty odd positions, and that when I, picked them up, that their heads would basically go limp and touch their back or their wing or their stomach. Like, they have really flexible necks. So when you look at the way their bones were laying, a lot of them, it looks like they had been, either knocked out of the sky or run into something and broken their necks, and that was the whole issue. And that's the reason they were found splayed the way that they were. Well, when you look at the environments they were found in, it's a lot of sand, which means maybe they were fighting in the air, fighting for mating rights or something like that. Who knows? fight to the death over the water and you fall in a lagoon or something. Or maybe a bigger bird comes to get you, and once it gets you, it's pretty slow itself, and an even bigger bird comes to get it. But the ones in Mongolia and China and we've also now got a breed here in the United States. There's also one over in Europe. And they're not necessarily all Archaeopteryx or Microraptors. They're all just a little bit different. So they're not like the same genus and species and all that other stuff. It's not exactly the same thing. It's just different genetic offshoots. Now, if we had a megalodon in the past that it was, its entire species was meant to get that big, I still don't think very many of them would have gotten that big. It would have been too inviting of a meal for a really big one to see one that was medium-sized. I don't think very many medium-sized would make it to big. I also don't believe that we've found the biggest fossils there are to find yet. As far as finding a megalodon skeleton that's intact enough, because it's basically that part of their mouth is kind of a skeleton. It's the only part of them that isn't pure cartilage as far as their skeletal structure, I guess. Because their skeleton is just cartilage, whereas ours, we're born with nearly all skeletal cartilage, or nearly all bodily cartilage that's starting to, what do they call it, collagenate? Is that right? I don't think that's the right word. But eventually our bones, get a whole bunch of calcium in them, and that helps to harden them and strengthen them. Sharks are invertebrates, so they don't do that. Theirs stays soft and cartilage-like. So there's a reason that we only ever find their mouths. Now, I don't understand how all that works, so I'm not going to try to explain it beyond what I can kind of sort of understand from what YouTube videos of different stuff throughout history that's been on TV says. Now, there are some of the things that we've seen on TV that we've gotten better explanations recently, or we've gotten fossils that better explain the type of animal that it was, and it's different than originally thought, and that's pretty cool too. But a lot of sharks come in basic shapes, and unless you have all of their parts, it can be difficult to tell one species from another if you don't have the genetic material. Some of them have just a little bit different shape of fins from other ones. Sometimes that's the only difference. The other thing is with the skeleton, since a lot of sharks are very similar, you would basically have to have a skin imprint to tell some breeds from others, especially in their juvenile state, because there are actually a lot of sharks that'll reach 6 to 8 foot long, but all of them start off tiny, all of them. Even the sharks that give live birth don't give live birth to very many, or to big sharks, So you can find pretty much every breed of shark out there that's alive. You can find one that's probably 6 to 8 inches long for all of the breeds that get 6 to 8 inches long or bigger. Now, when you compare something that's kind of a shark and kind of not, like a ray, some rays are carnivorous, And some of them, like the manta ray, they basically have a filtration system. They're pacifists. They've got a barb on their tail for just in case, and that's it. And manta rays and stingrays, they have the same thing. The barb on the tail. Thing that killed Steve Irwin. Anyway, you can decide what theory you like most, or whether or not you even care about which theory is the truth. I know that sometimes trying to take my mind off of things by watching one of those YouTube videos about megalodons, it's pretty cool, I guess. You know, it's just not something that I can really keep my time occupied with. It's not that it's not interesting, it's that there's stuff that's more important to know and more pertinent to my life and my situation. So even though once in a while I stop and talk about something that really has nothing to do with anything, such as whether there's a modern megalodon or if it's a deep sea shark with gigantism breathing through its skin, I don't know. I don't care. If there is one, cool. I'll probably read about it because that's, cool stuff to know. But it really doesn't make much of a shit in my life. You know how videos. Good to be with you. Thank you for coming to visit. Stay out of trouble or don't get caught. Remember, you are your brother's keeper and your sister's too, and no victim left behind.